It has been a very stressful and long 2 years, but as someone that's been involved with quite a number of projects, community projects and controversial projects over the last 30-some years, I just have to say, usually I budget 4 to 8 years to solve problems simpler than this. The issue tonight is whether to approve or reject a lease that's been negotiated by a team appointed by the county council, and I don't have an opinion on that. I don't live on the island. That's for you guys to decide and the islanders to decide. I will say that a lease has not been my first choice. It seems like the previous leases have been a constant source of irritation, inconvenience, and expense. I'm not sure why a lease is necessary. A right-of-way was approved. It's never been vacated. It's got to be there somewhere. The tidelands are an issue. I can tell you that the courts have ruled repeatedly that tidelands under federal navigable waters are subservient to navigation and have been taken repeatedly without compensation for such use. And maybe we agreed to lease them and we have to continue to lease them, but I really, from a policy perspective, don't understand why that should be. I'd rather address some of the issues with the negotiations, one of which was secrecy. I think that really hurt a lot of very positive things that could have come out of the discussion. I think that the ferry is one service, public service, to accommodate the public. There are many other public services and issues of public accommodation on the reservation and around the reservation that didn't come in to create a circumspect view of who is getting what. And I think it made it very one-sided kind of discussion. And I think as you look at this lease, if you are to approve it, you should really look at whether or not future discussions are going to be open public discussions or subject to the same constraints that were imposed during this negotiation. Specifically in terms of the documents, 30 seconds, you start to detail some of the history. I wish you would really thoroughly detail the history, and I think that'll help in any future efforts in regard to how the ferry is operated. And finally, I would say, just make sure you have an ironclad escape hatch, because I don't think you should agree to play for 35 years if there's a way out of it. Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak on this topic? Anyone else want to speak? All right. Mr. Gibson, our attorney is coming forward. I'm going to close the public testimony, but it looks like our attorney might have a question
for Mr. Gibson.
Some comments.
Can I ask?
Hold on just a moment.
Actually, it's a relatively simple matter. It's the question of who I am. I am not the person who advised the council in 1988. That is an urban legend that has been circulated among a few. The person who is named there, a friend of mine, but not me, a person who left the office shortly after that. I was working in the criminal division at that time, did not begin representing Public Works until 1998. So just to clarify that.
You stand exonerated for 10 years prior to when you came. All right, we're closing the public testimony portion of the hearing, and what are the wishes of the council? Councilmember Knudsen.
Well, my first question was for Mr. Gibson. He answered it. You answered my question. I was going to ask. And then my next question was, I'm not sure on who was on the negotiation team before me, but I think it was Councilmember Crawford, and who was the other? Who else?
Just me and the executive and Mr. Gibson.
Well, then I have a question for you. Were you aware of the unlimited foot passenger and vehicles for tribal, the fact that the vehicles were added for tribal members as well as their employees?
I don't think I'm going to go into, Councilmember Knudsen, the details of what was said or what wasn't said. We've got a lease in front of us. It was negotiated with a lot of effort over a very long period of time, and there were many, many, many meetings and many hours of discussion. And at this point, part of it was the Lummy's understanding that that was part of the agreement. I believe we call it agreement in concept, and that's what's before us. And if you have some feelings about that, is the nature of your question, was a commitment made by me on that aspect? And I will say that I don't recall making that specific commitment myself, but I don't want to speak for the executive or the attorneys that were there at the time, but that's before us tonight. So,
Well, could I ask the executive the same question then?
can I interrupt that just for a moment, just as a matter of process? I'd like to get a motion out on there. Councilmember Weimer?
Yes, I'd like to move approval.
Okay, that's good. Now we'll go back to, the motion has been made to approve the intergovernmental framework agreement, Uplands lease agreement, and Tidelands lease agreement for Lummi Island Ferry usage at Gooseberry Point. Now go ahead with your questions,
Okay,
Councilmember.
my question for the
Finney.
executive is were you familiar with the fact that the last lease added unlimited passage for tribal members, foot passage? Were you aware that vehicles and their employees were added? No.
Mr. Knudsen, you and I have had that discussion, and I was present at the negotiations, and I specifically recall the discussion of that for this reason. Subsequently, we added the term non-commercial because we were pushing back against the notion that commercial vehicles would be able to use this free of charge. I have specific recollection of that. If need be, I can check my notes, but there is no question in my mind this was specifically discussed, and it was a part of the negotiation. I do not fault you for not remembering it because you were not there, but in the early stages of the discussion, I recall it specifically because it came up during the time that Ralph Jefferson was part of the discussion. Ralph was there for the first 2 meetings.
Okay, any other questions, Councilmember Knudsen? Comments?
Well,
on that topic, at least.
I just would like to state that in a negotiation, a successful negotiation, both parties feel uncomfortable with what's done at the end. Now, I felt that that was the agreement we had. There are certain parts of this that I did not assume were going to be in this agreement, and that is one of them. So I just, if it was made prior to my getting on the negotiations team, I understand, but I'm just unclear if that was made part of the negotiations prior to my getting on there.
Well, I think one thing we can agree on is which you participated in, we did not discuss. Was brought up by them. Okay, Councilmember Brunner.
This is hard for everybody. I know that. But I want to say for the record, I don't know of another council member who's ever worked with the Islanders as much as I did. When your school was going to be shut down, I was there at the school board. I testified. When they tried to raise rates, I was in the minority. I felt it was unilateral and without enough substance. I didn't vote for it. And I see a really beaten down community. And I just having trouble with words. I am not going to support this lease. And I think it's really interesting to see people so beaten down when we talk about, well, reparations for people who were beaten down. How can we justify doing another wrong? And I don't care what anybody tells you, if this lease passes, you folks will be paying a whole lot more money. And a lot of the people on Lummi Island can't afford anymore. I was warned to be careful what I say because our attorney was going to get up and fault me and argue with me if I did it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't care. I think that we have such a legal right of way. I don't blame the Lummies for doing what they did. Every party to anything wants the best they can get. I fault this county, and I am really upset. I did take the time, by the way. I am not, practicing law without a license. I spent a lot of time with 2 government attorneys who can't believe what we're doing. And our attorney can get up and, you know, say he's the attorney and I'm not. I'm also not an idiot, and I did do my homework. And I'm very upset that everybody feels this is what we have to do. I think we run the ferry, and we owe you, and we have an obligation to you to get you to and from every day. This isn't something we can just say, too bad, you know, go away, we can't do anything. We just voted to do an $8 million bridge in a more rural, really rural area because it was the only ingress and egress. We have to get you to and from that island. But to say that we are going to just not avoid litigation, talk about setting a precedent. If we avoid litigation, every kind of party in the world, including the parties that have been involved so far, will come at us again and again and again because we want to avoid litigation. And boy, that has been pressed into us for the last 2 years. There are times when you can't avoid litigation, but it won't come from us. We have a legal right to operate until or unless the federal government steps in, which is what we have wanted all along. And I am really sorry, and I know people are unhappy and scared and disappointed. I wouldn't make a different decision if I lived on the island because I do feel I'm part of the island. And I'm sorry if it's a disappointment to people, and I'm really sorry. I feel like you guys have been beaten down so far, and I'm pretty disgusted too. I just, you know, I can't do something that I think is morally and legally wrong. So I'm really sorry.
Councilmember Mann.
Okay, well, I've lost sleep over this too, and we heard a lot of people say, oh, they hate the lease, but it is the best option. And I actually have come around to agreeing with that. I don't really like this lease a whole lot either, but I have looked and looked and looked for a plan B that's reasonable, that's implementable, that's reliable or affordable, and there isn't one. At least not that we can put in place anytime soon. And I am more than happy to work on finding alternatives to Gooseberry or the Whatcom Chief, because I know we're going to need a new ferry soon too. I think every option is still on the table as far as alternatives, but not in the short term. So I am going to support this lease. I was on the negotiating team, and I can tell you that this is the best deal we were going to get from their negotiating team. They would lose no sleep if your cars stopped driving down Haxton Way. I didn't believe it at first. In the early negotiation sessions, I thought they were bluffing. By the end, I was really convinced that they were willing to walk. And frankly, there were times when I was willing to walk. But as far as negotiations go, we put in a lot of time and a lot of stress, and this is the best deal we can get right now. I don't agree with Ms. Brenner's legal interpretations of the right-of-way. I, too, have researched it and talked with attorneys. I don't think that's a viable course of action. As interested as I would be in seeing what happened, I think that's an experiment best left in the mind. So I hope we can approve this tonight. I hope we can get 5 votes at least. I hope we can move on to the Lummi Task Force recommendations because they did an outstanding job. And hopefully we can implement those and save you some money, save us some money, and have safe and reliable ferry service to Gooseberry.
Okay. Councilmember Kirshner?
Well, this is difficult, and this really tests the mettle of a council member. I don't live on Lummi Island, and I don't live in the county, so the funding of all of this doesn't affect me personally. I want to acknowledge some of the comments that were made tonight and some of the comments that I've seen in letters that have been written to us. 2 years of long, difficult, divisive negotiations have ended us here. And this process has severely damaged relationships. It's made the residents of Lummi Island hostage, and it's created fear in your lives. It's made a mockery of our public process, and no one likes this lease. It's expensive. It's 3 times market value. It puts us in a terrible bind. I was told when Lori Caskey-Schreiber was leaving office, it's easy, Kathy, all you have to do is the right thing. And usually that's easy, to know what the right thing is. This decision has been the hardest decision that I've had to make since being sworn in as a council member. I am going to support this lease. I hate this lease, and I think that we should immediately begin looking at other options. But I've listened to the people that live on Lummi Island for 2 years go from one object of fear to another, and it's time to let you put your lives back in order and get on with your lives, and we need to do that. So I will support the lease.
Councilmember Weimer? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Knudsen. I saw the hand up over there.
Oh, yeah, you're better looking at me. Well, I too got some of the same emails, and I would like to correct a couple of things that we heard. I think one of the things that was stated was that it's created a divide between us and the tribe, and it's created animosity. I think it's done just the opposite. I would like to say that as one of the members of the negotiation team, I think our relationship with the tribe, if anything, has got better since this started. I know we all worked really hard on trying to get a deal at the end of this. If you looked at the original things that we were looking at, we have come down quite substantially, and we've met someplace in the middle. I'm going to take our attorney, Mr. Gibson, on his word that the things in this that were uncomfortable to me because I wasn't familiar with them were negotiated prior to me getting on that team. So because the document that we currently have in front of us has some things added to it that I was not familiar with, but I'll understand if they were agreed upon prior to myself getting on that negotiation team. I would like to say that the tribe always treated us with respect. There was some things that were done that made me feel very comfortable. We were able to acknowledge their culture as well as theirs to acknowledge ours. They allowed us to pray in our faith, and we allowed them to pray in their faith. And some of those things were important to me. I don't know if they were to other council members, but I appreciated that. So I would just like to say, I hope going forward that it continues to be a good relationship with the tribe, and I am going to hold my nose and vote yes for this.
Councilmember Weimer?
Well, I'm not going to rehash the whole thing. I think we've heard from most of the people in the audience, and you've heard from most of the council members. No one likes this lease. But we can't find a better financial alternative. There is no real route alternative, so I'm going to support this too. I think the next thing, the one thing I wanted to say is, to some degree, I think the ferry makes the people on Lummi Island stronger. I'm always impressed whatever the issue is, how people on Lummi Island seem to know how to organize and problem solve and advocate for themselves. And I heard people who don't often agree come to an agreement tonight after lots of discussion and looking at these issues, even though it's not a popular decision for any of us. So I think the next thing we need to do, and certainly the Ferry Task Force proved this to me, is we need to move forward on a forming a citizen advisory committee on ferries on Lummi Island, because that task force brought us some great ideas on how to deal with the operation of the ferry, and I think they can bring us equally great ideas on how to look for alternatives to this ferry, since there is a clear out clause in here. And maybe we can find a better way with some more time and some expertise from the people that this really affects, and that's the folks on Lummi Island. So in the next couple of meetings, I'll be bringing forward a proposal to form such a permanent ferry task force, and I'm going to support this evening.
Councilmember Larson?
I find myself in a real interesting situation, just like all of us do, and that is, here we're sitting here tonight and under really odd circumstances, and those circumstances are that I feel like the pressure associated with somebody's lifestyle and getting to and from work, and the seventh grader and the kids that spoke tonight, I mean, those are real families' lives that this is impacting. And my challenge with this is that here we're talking about a lease that expired in February 2010, and we're deciding on it now. We're in September 2011, and most of the people here that talked about the lease, they said, we have to do it. It's not a good deal. I don't like it, but we have to do it. It's the best that we could get. And I disagree that this was the best deal that we could get. And in fact, I've disagreed with that from the beginning. There's a number of challenges I have with it. Number one is that, as was mentioned, we're paying 3 times market rate plus CPI. We're paying $200,000 for something where the high appraisal was $65,000. To me, that's not a very good deal. That doesn't include parking, and we just found that we had some parking challenges that wasn't rolled into the lease. The free non-commercial usage for the Lummi Nation, you know, I've been a council member for 8 months. I think the first meeting I was in December, and I didn't know about that part of the negotiation until the lease showed up after the fact, after, you know, we'd taken a straw poll and everybody had sort of agreed where they are and where they weren't and where we had the votes. And so there were a number of things that were apparently negotiated that we on the council, you know, I don't think, at least I wasn't privy to. My challenge with this whole thing is that as this was going, as the process was moving forward, I felt like the Lummi Nation did a great job of leveraging our fear, and they leveraged, you know, some people used they compared it to us having a gun to our head, and I feel that that was the case, that they used substantial amount of leverage, but yet we did not use leverage, and in fact, we did not explore our rights, the right-of-way, early on in the process anyway, or at least that wasn't communicated with us. Issues came up, and we talked about the right-of-way issue. We talked about a number of other options that we didn't seriously explore. And the thing that concerned me the most, and I think it was worst of all, is that we let them know up front that we weren't exploring any of those options. So we completely got rid of our leverage. We've spent $15 million over the last, I think it's 20 plus years out on the Lummi Nation, and yet we weren't prepared to use that as leverage to negotiate a better deal. So in other words, we went into negotiations with no leverage, and they had substantial leverage. And the leverage they had was the fact that every single one of us sitting up here does not want to compromise the families on Lummi Island. So I feel like, and I don't fault the Lummi Nation for this at all. In negotiations, you know, you put your best foot forward. But I feel like they were playing hardball and we were playing Nerf ball. I just, and I communicated that through the entire process. Everyone up here knows where I was positioned. And I guess what I'd like to say is that I commend the council members involved in the latter part of the negotiation process. You know, I think that it was very difficult that we started the negotiations out at 3 times market rate. And that's where we began. So there's really nowhere for the council members that got involved to go from there. You know, how do you back up once the horse is out of the barn? You know, we couldn't do it. So I think that when the council members got involved, I think they used all the leverage that we were given. And the only leverage that we were given was the possibility